From the campus of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the 1st Congressional District Republican Primary Candidate Debate.
Welcome to a debate with Republican primary candidates running for Utah's 1st Congressional District. I'm Julie Rose, host of BYUradio's Top of Mind podcast. It is my pleasure to moderate today's discussion. Sponsored by the Utah Debate Commission, an organization dedicated to educating voters and encouraging the civil exchange of ideas. The candidates invited to speak here this afternoon are Paul Miller and Blake Moore. If you are watching or listening live, you are welcome to send your reactions and questions on social media. Use the hashtag UTDebates. The format for this debate is as follows. Each candidate will have a predetermined time to respond to the questions, and on occasion there will be rebuttal time. A random drawing held prior to the debate determined that candidate Moore will get the initial response to the first question. We'll then alternate turns on the remaining questions throughout the debate. Okay. Let's debate. Candidate Moore, and you will both have 1 minute to respond to this question. What is it about you specifically that makes you the best person for this job?
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for being here. Thank you to the Debate Commission, as always, and Mr. Miller. I look forward to a productive discussion. I think more importantly than anything, after this week with the whole entire family going down with the flu and the back and forth, I want to thank my wife in particular. This role takes on a lot, and it takes on a lot from the family, and this has been definitely a week to tell her thank you. The reason is very simple. When I first ran, I said, see, 3 very simple things. Be a part of reversing debt culture, support defense in Hill Air Force Base, and be an optimistic conservative voice for the next generation. The only way to do this is through the Ways and Means Committee, which I fought incredibly hard to deal with both major debt drivers and what the economy needs when all of these tax provisions expire next year. My support for Hill Air Force Base is rock solid, and when there was a leadership spot open up, I decided to take an optimistic, win the future type of message to my colleagues, and they responded in a positive way, and it was elected me into the first time in Utah's history to have a Republican in House leadership. I will always be focused on the reality of this job, and I look forward to continuing that on with my constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Miller, you have 1 minute. Do you need me to repeat the question?
Nope, I'm okay.
Thanks.
I'm also very grateful to be here. Thank you, Congressman Moore, for being here. There's one thing that I have that Blake doesn't have, and I am the middle class. A lot of the inflation and a lot of the problems in D.C. affect the middle class the most. And I'm not going there to enrich myself. I'm going there to push policies that will affect us in positive ways. I'm not going there to say that I'm going to reduce the deficit and then vote for every spending bill in front of my face. We need real change in D.C., and we need it right now.
We'll save rebuttals until we get into the question phase. Let's move on to the next question. Thank you both for your opening remarks there. Hill Air Force Base, and Mr. Miller, you will have this question first. Hill Air Force Base is a major employer in the 1st District. If elected, how would you work to ensure current residents of Utah are prepared to fill the skilled workforce needs of Hill Air Force Base? Mr. Miller?
So we need to embrace Hill Air Force Base. It is vital for the 1st District. And as far as filling the skilled needs for Hill Air Force Base, there's a lot of college programs and stuff that help with that. I know Utah State and Weber State University have several programs that are geared towards helping those in that community. And I hope to promote a lot of growth with Hill Air Force Base, but along with that growth, we need to help control our military spending. And so that's one thing that I hope to implement. We're spending way too much, and yeah.
Mr. Moore, same question.
Thank
Hill
you.
Air Force Base.
This has been an absolute top priority for us for my entire time back in Washington. Some of the 3 most important things to do is to make sure that we fund the programs that exist there. The Sentinel program and the F-35 program. We're the first operational wing of the F-35, the 5th generation fighter pilot. fighter strike force that exists there. Those are bringing in significant, strong jobs that are bolstering our economy here in Utah. But there's the one third thing that really goes unnoticed is my introduction of the 180-day rule. It will be a repeal of the 180-day rule. And what it does is, this is an arbitrary number and an arbitrary time limit that we've decided shouldn't even be there, and we just keep doing waivers for it. But we need to make sure that our armed services, our active duty military members, when they decide to retire, they still have an opportunity to take the skills that they have and promote all this work within the civilian workforce. Hill Air Force Base is home to over 25,000 workers that are supporting our national security. And these individuals, these civilians that want to continue to join in the mission and the fight, they need to be able to do so without these arbitrary federal rules that exist.
Mr. Moore, the next question goes to you. The IRS also employs a sizable workforce in Ogden in the 1st District. How do you plan to forge relationships with the IRS?
Right, so I'll show up. I've done town halls with folks at the IRS. There's a lot of debate that's been going on since the Inflation Reduction Act was implemented by sort of Democrat rule. When you have one-party control in Washington, D.C., you can vote on a bill that is party line only. It's called budget reconciliation. And President Biden enacted 2 of these. One was the first one that was the worst possible thing for our middle class and lower income Americans, and that was the American Rescue Plan. The second was Inflation Reduction Act. These are party line votes. They don't even have to go through the filibuster in the Senate, and they've wreaked havoc on this. One thing that they did in this bill was that they did an $80 billion funding approach to the IRS, and the IRS doesn't need that. The folks at the IRS, they say the most important thing they need is better customer service capabilities. And so what we did as Republicans, we repealed the largest portion of that funding and kept just the part that helps them do their job in an effective, productive way. That's what they want. They want to be able to do their job with efficiency and do it what they went in to do that job for. When we have 6,000, largest processing facility in the country here in Ogden, we need to make sure that they have the tools necessary to do their job effectively.
Mr. Miller, same question to you.
Yeah, do you want to repeat the question?
Happy to. The IRS also employs a sizable workforce in Ogden. How do you plan to forge relationships with the IRS?
You know, the IRS is a vital agency in our federal government. A lot of times they get a bad rap, but we need to make sure that they do have the tools necessary to fulfill their jobs in an efficient way. And to be honest, I haven't really looked incredibly into detail into this topic. And I do realize that the IRS is in Ogden. I have several people that I am friends with that are there. But as far as, I just want to make a note as far as the 87,000 IRS agents that Joe Biden put in, and that is one of the things that I would love to see cut out of our budget. We don't need more IRS agents, and they say that they're there to go after those that are dodging taxes, and I think that's a farce, and it's only going to hurt middle and low income constituents.
We'll move on to the next question. And Mr. Miller, this one goes to you first. Is Russia a threat to countries like Poland, Finland, and the Baltic states? If Russia were to expand its war in Europe into NATO countries, would you support a U.S. military response?
That's a good question. I am anti-Russia. I don't like Putin, and you know, that's a complex situation. It's obviously going to, like, we have an agreement with NATO. And so, yes, there probably is going to be a response because we are in that agreement, in that NATO alliance. And as far as Russia goes, I don't know if we're going to get a Ukraine question, but yeah, I'll just end it with that.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, would you like me to restate the question?
You. If Article 5 is breached and Russia were to invade one of our NATO allies, we would respond. We will respond, but we will be putting American lives at risk in that situation. We need to do everything we can to deter that from happening. The cost associated with going to full-scale war with Russia is far worse than anything we've had to do today. Now, but here's the thing that people are not understanding about this whole concept. We made a commitment to Ukraine in 1991 that we would support them if they gave up their nuclear weapons. That's the thing that keeps us the most safe. We do it right here at Hill Air Force Base. It's called the Sentinel program. That keeps global security across the entire world because people know not to mess with us. When Obama was president, Putin took over Crimea. Nothing happened during President Trump. They didn't advance. When Biden was president, they advanced again. If President Trump is back in the White House and he came up with an idea, President Trump came up with an idea to support Ukraine right now and get this to a point where he can end this conflict. And I hope we can end this before it ever enters into anything related to an Article 5 breach, and anything related to our NATO allies.
If I could ask a follow-up question, and we'll go to you, Mr. Miller, and then to you, Mr. Moore, and you'll each have 1 minute for a follow-up if you need it. What exactly do you believe Congress can do to deter Russia from expanding its aggression into NATO countries that would incite a military response?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that the sanctions that the Biden administration has imposed aren't really doing us any favors right now. It's not hindered Russia's progress, and Russia's still going on, and their military might is obviously stronger and more resilient than the Ukrainian military might. And one thing that I want to bring up about Ukraine is Ukraine's not an ally. So, and what is the end goal with Ukraine? Why do we keep funding the Ukraine war? Because Ukraine does not really have a real economic impact on the U.S. They only are about $2 billion of trade between the U.S. and Ukraine, which is 0.1%. So why are we so invested in Ukraine? And I want to ask Congressman Moore, where are we getting the money to fund the Ukraine war?
Mr. Moore, starting with the follow-up question, what can Congress do? What can the United States do to deter Russia?
Largely what I had just expressed. You can't deter Russia without keeping them from invading and taking full control of Ukraine. That you don't get to have it both ways in this situation. Russia could easily take their tanks and walk into Kyiv. And I hope that no American, no matter where you feel about our support for Ukraine, I hope we all can agree that we do not want to see Vladimir Putin and Russian tanks entering into Kyiv. Right? And if you don't want to call them an ally, great. That's your point. They're not a NATO ally, but they are fighting for their own democracy. When you have private, personal conversations with people that have been there, Senate President Stuart Adams in particular, who's okay with me sharing anything related to this, just seeing the children that are being abducted and killed and taken back to Russia to be re-educated. Like, they're fighting for their own democracy, and we have supported them with less than 0.2% of our GDP. And we've galvanized NATO, we've galvanized our European allies to do the lion's share of the humanitarian work, and our job was to provide lethal aid for them to be able to fight back. When they're willing to fight for themselves without putting a single American life at risk, we're able to deter them from doing this. To your exact question, we can deter them if we're willing to support them. It cannot be an endless war, though. That's why I talk about getting President Trump back in the White House. He has, I believe, the capability to end this conflict. Thank you.
Mr. Miller asked you a question, so I'll give you 20 seconds to respond, and then Mr. Miller, we'll come back to you for some time to rebut here on this, and then we'll move on to the next question. He asked, where would the money come from? Where, if we're going to continue, if deterring Russia requires continuing to support Ukraine militarily to prevent Russia from taking Ukraine, where does that money come from?
Right. What I'm strongly concerned about, and I'll take most of my questions from you, Ms. Rose, today. What I'm concerned about mostly, though, is what it would cost us if you let Putin walk into Ukraine and you let Russian tanks enter in Kyiv, and then it breaches Article 5 of our NATO treaty. The cost will be astronomical. And most of all of this money is supporting jobs here back in the U.S. that we can provide them, simply lethal supply. And part of it is actually in a loan package that President Trump came up with this idea.
Mr. Miller.
So he talks about protecting democracy. And, you know, it's not our job to protect democracy all around the world. If that were our job, we would be bankrupt. And we are bankrupting ourselves doing that. And also, he mentioned children getting abducted. Well, what about the funding that he's contributing to along our southern border, where children are being rented and abducted, and they're being abused and brought into this huge migration crisis on our southern border?
We're going to get to the immigration question, so let's move on to the next question.
But just as he brought up something, I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about with funding that I've supported. That's completely out of... So one thing you're going to always get from me is the reality of this job. And it's unfortunate because there's so much spin and so much political rhetoric that gets spewed. You will always get reality out of me, as I mentioned in my opening statement. There will be rhetoric and there will be reality. And to me, that is what I will always get. I have no idea what the gentleman's talking about. Thank you.
We're going to address immigration in just a moment, so if you'll bear with me here, let's move on to the next question. And this question goes to you, Mr. Moore, first. If elected, you would likely be part of a very narrow, either majority or minority,
yes, we will,
in a closely divided Congress. How would you work in that situation to the benefit of a second district? Would you be open to compromise?
Second district, you mean first district, right?
So you're talking to the benefit of the first.
Talking about Northern Utah.
Yeah, to your
yeah, it's been very difficult. It's been the 118th Congress has been unique, as we all have been able to see and watch. So being in a narrow majority is tough, and you have to work really hard at building relationships, establishing trust. And when there was a seat open up, I disagree with why there was a seat in leadership opening up last fall. When there was a seat that was opened up, at first I was reluctant to it because I was joked with my chief of staff, like, why in the world would I run for leadership? Don't you see what they do to the leadership around here, as we just vacated a speaker and basically the first time in history? But I knew it was going to be important for Utah. I knew it's important for Utah to have a voice at the table. When I first ran, I said, I want to take Utah principles back to Washington, and I don't want that to just be a bumper sticker. And so I ran for this leadership position, kind of putting myself out there. And we have had, if you look at the outcomes that we've been able to have as a House majority, a narrow majority, it's not easy, but we're accomplishing things. We're keeping all of President Biden's spending completely at bay. He enacted over $5 trillion. My time is up, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk more about this. But you have to build relationships, and you have to stick together as a team. Sometimes we do it, and we haven't done it in some other times.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you'll have an additional 10 seconds here for your response. If elected, you'd be part of a very narrow majority or minority in Congress. How will you work to the benefit of the first district, and will you be open to compromise?
Yeah, a lot of that deals with inflation and voting for these spending bills. Congressman Moore talks about voting against funding Biden's agenda, but yet look at what he's voted for as far as spending bills. All of them. All of the omnibus and minibus bills. He's funded Biden's agenda. So I know that it's going to be really hard and difficult if I were to get into Congress. I'm not running to be part of the uniparty or the establishment. I'm running to be different and to make a difference and not to enrich myself. I want good, positive policy for the first district and for America. And, I'm not running to compromise. I think that the Republican Party has compromised their principles too much. And it seems like the Democrats are the only ones that win out of the compromise. And so I am running to change that, and we need to get real results and implement real policy that's beneficial to the first district.
Mr. Moore, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yes, thank you. So let's talk about the reality here of what's going on. So when I'm in the minority, it's very easy. In fact, I did it vast majority of time, voted against pretty much all of President Biden's spending agenda. Inflation comes from the American Rescue Plan, the $2 trillion no offset spending bill that he enacted his first 2 months in office when the Senate flipped. The reality of the appropriations process, when Republicans are in the majority, even with a narrow majority, we did what we haven't been able to do since 2013. Republicans have been able to support defense and lower non-defense discretionary with a $2 trillion savings out of the budget cycle. That's not my numbers, that's CBO numbers. So $2 trillion is taken out when you support something. It's easy to vote no. When you're in the majority, though, you've got to lead. And we've been back there trying to lead this through. I support Speaker Johnson in his effort to try to trim out as much of this budget as we possibly can while keeping all of President Biden's other initiatives that he would want to do completely at bay.
Mr. Miller, you'll have an additional 30 seconds for your rebuttal.
Yeah, so he talks about cutting $2 trillion out of our budget. But that $2 trillion is over a 10-year period. So that means that you will need the majority in Congress in order to approve those spending cuts every single time. So it only helps when we're in the majority, and we can't bank on that. And also, every time that we vote for the deficit that we've continued to have, it increases our interest payment, which our interest payment will soon catch up to us, and soon we'll be printing money to pay that off, which causes inflation.
Mr. Moore, I'll give you one more rebuttal, and I ask you to respect the clock at 30 seconds, please.
Absolutely, and that's great because as I mentioned, the budget cycle, I'm not trying to hide that information. Oh, that's what a budget cycle is. That's what the CBO does. The vast majority of the appropriations bill supports our defense, our veterans, our border security, our homeland security. That's what that is. That's the big misnomer that often gets missed in a lot of the rhetoric that you'll see. But the reality is we need to make sure that we support our defense community, right? And especially when you represent 25,000 plus individuals serving every day to support our defense community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, 30 seconds and we'll move on.
I'm okay.
All right, next question we have, it will go to you, Mr. Miller, and it's actually a video question from a student at Southern Utah University. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Abby Bidon. I'm a student of political science, sociology, and law at Southern Utah University. My question for you is, there's been recent discussion in the media about whether or not Election Day should be a national holiday so more people could vote. What is your stance on this issue? Thank you.
Mr. Miller, to you.
I love this question. Thank you so much for asking it. And yes, I think that the first Tuesday in November should be a national holiday, and it should be one that Americans get off. I feel like ever since the universal mail-in voting has been implemented, there has been fraud, despite what the media might tell you. And so we do need to secure our elections. We do need voter ID when we vote. And we need to help safeguard our elections to make them more secure.
Mr. Moore.
Yes, I love the idea of a national holiday for this. It's an important thing. It is something that could, I think, get a lot of broad bipartisan support. And so agree with the question. And the thing that, one of the very first bills, so when you have a chance to serve in Congress, this is not something I understood right away, but before I got there, your first 10 bills called HR 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 10, that tells you what the priority is. Republicans, when we got the majority, was energy, was immigration and border security, and then it was our HR 3 was tax reform. We have a very important year in 2025 with regards to all of the President Trump signed into law tax provisions in 2017. Those are going to be expiring next year. Those are our HR 1 through 3. Democrats put in HR 1. Their HR 1 was this this bill that would obliterate all the things required to run safe and secure elections. And that was something that I was very strongly against. And if they get back in the majority, I assume it'll be their HR 1 again.
Thank you. Let's talk immigration, gentlemen. Congress has been unable to reach immigration reform, an agreement on immigration reform for decades at this point. A comprehensive, negotiated, bipartisan reform package was defeated earlier this year. What would you do to address the immigration issue? Would you support bipartisan legislation to solve the crisis? And this first question goes to Mr. Moore.
Thank you. So the most important thing that we can be doing on our immigration right now is to enact HR 2. Senator Schumer is obviously not going to do it, unfortunately. We've given him every opportunity that he had. Fortunately, there are also a handful of Republicans that were unwilling to support it as well. Back last September, I believe it was, and it actually lost us some leverage. Those are the downsides to being in a narrow majority, is we didn't have the leverage to be able to get this across the finish line. But Senator Schumer's had the chance to do it. The whole talk about bipartisan legislation regarding immigration, most everybody actually agrees with it. We know we need to fix a lot of our visa programs, our H-2A, H-2B. We have workforce needs here that could easily be filled by these. But unless you do the border security apparatus first, remain in Mexico, end catch and release, fix the parole authority, you will only invite more border cartel activity at the southern border. And that's what's been going on at this crisis over the last 3 years. That's what we're trying to do. You have to deal with border security first, and then come on board with a merit-based immigration reform program that a lot of people already agree with. So that's the reality of this one.
Mr. Miller, and you'll have an additional 10 seconds. Yeah,
I also agree with HR 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023. That was legislation that I would also support. I'm not here to compromise on the Democrats' immigration policies. I think the laws that we have in place right now are the laws that we need to continue. And we just need to enforce the law. And so Mr. Moore, or Congressman Moore, talked about he didn't fund the border. Well, he voted for HR 4665, which talks about migration and refugee assistance, which was it was in the billions. of dollars for funding for migration assistance. And so, yes, he is funding Biden's border policies. And not to mention, he also voted for the omnibus bill, which also furthered Biden's agenda. But we do need, one thing that Congressman Moore forgot to mention is we need to finish the wall. We do need the border wall, and it is a huge safeguard as far as illegal immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Right. Again, the omni that he mentions, again, is the appropriations process, and Republicans, being in the majority, led that process. We got the best deal that we could possibly get. We haven't done what we did since Republicans were in control of Congress in 2013 to support defense and lower non-defense discretionary. We need to make sure that we at least provide some security to our border agents right now, and we don't want to make them go to work without getting paid. That's the part that I think I'm going to disagree with my challenger here on.
Mr. Miller, yes, 30 seconds.
Yeah, in the omnibus bill was chocked full of foreign assistance, and that is exactly what we need to get out of our spending. We don't need to be borrowing money from China to go and spend it in some foreign nation. That is exactly what we need to get out of our budget. And one thing that I would love Congressman Moore to answer is what was the most let's see, how do I want to word this? What was the most negative thing that we passed in the omnibus bill? He talks about positives, but what's the negative? What did we compromise?
Would you like a rebuttal,
No,
Mr. Moore?
I'll take the questions from you, Ms. Rose.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Next question is from social media. We have a member of our online audience named Justin Hill. And this question goes first to you, Mr. Miller. Would either candidate support legislation to remove the National Firearms Act and Gun Control Act? Mr. Miller.
Yeah, there are some things that we might need to change in the NFA. But I think where the Second Amendment is right now is in a pretty good spot. I support, going through certain regulations as far as getting fully automatics, but I in no way support a semi-automatic weapons ban, or assault rifle ban, or any other restrictions on our Second Amendment rights as they currently sit.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
All right, I have a very strong rating with organizations like the National Shooting Sportsman Foundation, the NRA. These groups see that I'm a very strong supporter of the Second Amendment, reasonable in my approach to be able to enact good legislation too. So with the NFA, it doesn't have the support to get past a Senate filibuster, and it's not subject to the budget reconciliation process that is required when we have the White House, and Senate. So it's essentially, it's not going to happen. It's been talked about for decades, but what we need to do is to make sure that what we used, and particularly with this appropriations process, we got it so veterans are never going to be targeted through their bank account. If they bounce a check, there would be Second Amendment issues. They would have their Second Amendment rights potentially taken away. And we stood firm as a Republican conference to make sure that we got rid of that. Gun Owners of America lauded us passing the appropriations process to use that piece of leverage. We're also doing something else with suppressors. There's the Pittman-Robertson Act that puts a lot of the money towards conservation. Gun owners, hunters are our nation's first conservationists. They want healthy forests. We are taking a bill that would take the money that is used on these suppressors and moving it over to the Pittman-Robertson. It's lauded by all of the big gun groups and the sportsman folks as some of the best, most logical legislation we can do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have now reached the halfway point of the debate featuring Republican primary candidates Paul Miller and Blake Moore in District 1. Once again, I'm Julie Rose, and we encourage you to submit your questions during this live broadcast. Use the hashtag #UTDebates on social media. Now let's return to the debate. You've both mentioned large bills, omnibus bills, and we have seen many very large bills covering an array of issues, both budget and issue bills in Congress. If you agree with the majority of the policies in a bill, but disagree with some parts, would you vote against it or vote in support as a compromise? How do you draw that line? Mr. Moore, we'll start with you.
Thank you. This is a question ultimately about leadership. I would say that Speaker Johnson has done the yeoman's work to take over where we were last fall. And even he would say, I don't support every single thing that was in the annual appropriations process. But what we did with the annual appropriations process was make sure that we supported defense. We gave the biggest military pay increase that we've been able to do. We're working on some for some of the younger, newer airmen and other enlisted folks as we approach the next cycle for FY25. But when you're in the majority, you get an opportunity to lead. And if there's something to quibble about, you do everything you can to be able to remove that piece of legislation. Oftentimes, what a lot of the rhetoric gets spewed about is early in the process. You have to advance some of these bills, but you know once it goes through the conferencing, it will be taken out before the final passage. And so a lot of the rhetoric gets spewed about something that's early on in the bill, and as you move it along the process, it ultimately gets removed. We know it's going to get removed, but again, you can't control all of the false narratives that go out there, but what you can do is make sure that you're reducing spending at every turn that you possibly can and using every piece of leverage. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, to you, would you like me to repeat the question?
Sure.
We have seen very large bills covering an array of issues, both budget bills, issue bills in Congress. If you agree with the majority of the policies in a bill, but disagree with some other parts, do you vote against it? Do you vote in support as a compromise? How do you draw that line? And you're welcome to take 5 extra seconds.
Yeah, like that's the thing. What is a deal breaker? What is a deal breaker? How? And you know, one of the bills that Congressman Moore voted for was the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023, where it entered women into the draft. So if that's not a deal breaker, what is a deal breaker? We need to get a lot of this foreign assistance out of our debt, like I had said previously. And we need, you know, and all of these have been agreed upon by the Republican conference in the House. We need single line veto item power. We need to debate each appropriations division individually. And we need ample time to debate and vet these spending bills. And that process is not being entertained. And so every time that they bring a spending bill to the floor, it's always 24 to 48 hours before the spending expires, resulting in a government shutdown if they don't vote for it. So if they're always going to, and my opponent has always said that he will not vote against a spending bill if there's a government shutdown tied to it. So if they're always going to use this process, he will never vote against spending.
Mr. Moore, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Once again, never said that, but my challengers can say whatever they're going to say. They have to grab at straws, and that's just the game that we're playing in this world of politics. The key piece here, so government shutdowns. Have they ever solved our debt? No. I don't want to go to a government shutdown, but we use as much leverage as we can before that moment happens. But if we're ready to go and stand firm on something, which we weren't before this appropriations bill, because we were getting what we required back last summer, was to increase defense and lower non-defense, that was a significant win for us.
Mr. Miller, yes, 30 seconds.
Yes, Representative Moore did say that he would not vote. He wouldn't vote against.
He said I would never vote against.
He would not vote against a spending bill
here, because if he's going to make accusations, we need to make sure that we're very clear about what I would do. I would absolutely go to a government shutdown if the Republican conference is united in getting us out of that shutdown. But if we're fractured and we already got what we required of it, then going to a shutdown would be arbitrary, and it would be for political points, which I'm not back in Washington to do.
Let's let Mr. Miller respond. Thank you.
Happily.
So he had a town hall at the Hill Air Force Base Aerospace Museum, and he talked about a government shutdown has never resulted in decreased spending. So I will not vote against a government shutdown. And so, if you're never going to vote against a government shutdown, then congressional leadership will take this abusive process and shove it down our throats every single time. It's time that we start voting no, time to get all of the rules that we've already agreed to in the Republican conference in the House, and not suspend the rules every time that there's a spending bill.
You'll each have 30 more seconds to do rebuttal if you'll respect the clock. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
My challenger brought up something earlier that I actually already highlighted about kind of the rhetoric that gets spewed about if it's in the bill very early on. When we're in the minority, this was something that happened back in the 117th Congress, which we've already been through a whole election cycle about, was the women in the draft clause. I voted against that. I voted against that provision. The bill passed because Democrats put it in there, and then we had it removed during the conferencing process. It's very simple, but I'm not going to stop our support for our military because of one provision that we know is going to be removed before we vote on the final bill. That's the rhetoric. Again, what you have to deal with in this role, but it is what it is, and I just want to make sure that I'm very clear about that.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
And this is his reasoning for funding Biden's agenda as well. So you can vote against it in an amendment, but you don't have to vote for it in the end. And yet he'll vote for it in the end every single time, furthering Biden's agenda, furthering the left's agenda. And so if you're not ready to
say every single time.
Please wait until he finishes.
But if
He's
he
got
says
10 more
every
seconds.
single time, and I have
You'll have a
a
moment
track
for rebuttal.
record over 3.5 years of voting against virtually all of Biden's major spending and appropriations bills in my first term.
Please
except
wait for
when
the
I'm
rebuttal,
in the majority,
Mr. Moore.
I will support our speaker if we can drive this agenda forward.
Mr. Miller, please go ahead and finish.
Okay, I will correct that. Yes. Since they've been in the majority, he has funded Biden's agenda. Okay, that's probably accurate.
Not necessarily, because Biden wouldn't want to put parity between he would want to put parity between defense and non-defense. I'm just being accurate. I committed to my constituents that I will be about reality and not rhetoric, and not lies, and not the false narratives that get spewed in this crazy world of politics. But I get why they exist. But I want to be very clear. Biden's agenda would have put parity on defense and non-defense. And what we did is we increased defense and lowered non-defense discretionary. That's not Biden's agenda. And the CBO director even admitted that to us in our committee hearing.
We're going to move on. Mr. Miller, do you have 15 seconds more that you'd like to say without making additional accusations that will continue this?
Yeah. And so that's the thing. And you asked this question earlier. When is the threshold of when do you vote on a spending bill? You know, what are we going to compromise? And that's the thing. Like, I'm not here to further Biden's agenda or the left's agenda. Like, we need to stop compromising.
We agree on that.
Thank you both. Moving on to the next question, and I believe it is Mr. Miller that will have the first response here. The personal income tax cuts passed by Congress in 2017 will expire in 2025. Do you favor the extension of those cuts? Why or why not?
Yes, I absolutely do, because it helps the middle and low income families in the district. And I already know what my opponent's going to say. He's going to say that he's going to need to be on the budget committee to implement these policies.
Ways and Means Committee. It goes through the Ways and Means
Please
Committee.
wait until you'll have your opportunity. You will have your opportunity.
So he's going to be the only one to be in Congress, and so he needs to get reelected, so that way we can push this. The Speaker of the House will find somebody else that will also vote in favor of these tax cuts. And so, which they are important. And, you know, tax cuts for middle-income or middle-class Americans is very important. And we need to protect those.
Mr. Moore.
I'll continue on with that, because I am absolutely so excited about being in a position in 2025 to redo all of the tax provisions that were done by President Trump and congressional Republicans back in 2017. We have seen strong, sustained economic growth since that took place, and it has weathered storm, it weathered COVID, it even weathered Democrat spending when they had one-party rule in 2022. Worked really hard to get on this committee because I knew Utah runs the best type of we're the #1 economy in the country. Utah needs representation. We had some of this representation, and much of it when Senator Hatch was in the Senate. There is only one committee, however, in the House, and even one committee in all of Congress that generates a revenue bill like this type of tax-related bill, and that's the House Ways and Means Committee. And I fought like crazy to be on this because I wanted to take what I know Utah does so well and inject it. I am on 3 different tax teams: international competitiveness, community, and family tax. The things that the Democrats get wrong about this is we doubled the standard deduction for lower and middle-income Americans, and we also increased the child tax credit. That's what Republicans did in 2017, and all they do is sit there and lie about the fact that this is just for the wealthy, and it's not. This is actually what grew our real wage growth without increasing inflation, and I look forward to repeating that for next year.
Thank you. Let's talk about health care, and this question will go to you first, Mr. Moore. Health care costs for all Americans, including Utahns, have risen dramatically. What would you do as a member of Congress to reduce health care costs?
There's only 2 things we can do to get after health care costs. And that is to make a market, an industry that thrives like virtually every other industry that we have in our private sector. Healthcare has never, and for as long as I can remember, and as long as I've been alive, as long as we've been alive, we have never had a healthcare market that's focused on 2 things: transparency and competition. And you think about that. You have the choice as a consumer to make decisions virtually every day. When you go to the grocery store, which tires you're going to go put on your car, what you do with regards to even when you talk insurance, because it's health related, your car insurance. You get a chance to just to identify what's going to be cheaper, what's going to be not. We don't have that in this system. So this year, the Ways and Means Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee, they have joint jurisdiction over healthcare. I sit on the health subcommittee, and what we're doing is we're able to take out a lot of the glut, and it even ended up being a very bipartisan approach to a lot of the process that goes on with respect to filing a claim and everything that's related with insurance. The second thing is quality measures from CMS. They're absolutely horrible and archaic. We've got a bill that will address that. And then getting these two provisions, transparency and competition, are huge for this market. And the only thing that will save and reduce costs, instead of just making, otherwise you just finance it a different way, right? You got to be able to actually deal with the root cause. Yes.
Mr. Miller, same question.
Yeah, so I know that we've implemented regulations as far as transparency of costs and for competition, to promote competition. But I think this is one industry that the federal government needs to have less regulation in. And we need to not always turn to the federal government to solve all of our problems. So I think the more regulation and the more policies around this are just going to hurt the middle class and low income families. And it'll result in more reporting and more resources that are devoted to that, and so it'll just increase the cost of our health insurance.
If I could ask a follow-up related to Medicare, trustees of the Medicare Fund predict that it will become insolvent in 2036. How would you shore up Medicare? Again, this will go to Mr. Moore first. How would you shore up Medicare, and are you interested in cutting benefits to beneficiaries?
This year, the House Budget Committee passed what's called the Fiscal Commission Act, and it was it's an attempt that's been in the works for a while, and we passed it out of committee, and it's actually getting held up right now. It's unfortunate because we know that Senator Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, won't necessarily take it up, but we want to continue to promote the good process that this would create. Medicare and Social Security will run insolvent in 2033. Actuaries differ plus or minus two or so years. At that point, all of the folks that are on these programs will have a 24% immediate cut. That's already in law. So when Democrats say, we don't touch Social Security, and they write ads about this and they attack our members from all over the place, they don't hit me, they hit areas in like California and New York that give us the majority in Congress. It's completely disingenuous, because if we do nothing, we will actually be facing a massive shortfall. And so we need to do the Fiscal Commission Act, which will put the best minds together, and it will actually create, it comes up with the recommendations, but it forces us to vote on it. It's not just a pie in the sky, these are good ideas. It will actually force Congress. It's the catalyst that we need to actually get something done on here, and it will be the best thing for our entire debt.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I got it.
Thank you.
So as he talks about the Fiscal Commission Act, that deals a lot with reporting. So reporting is good, but if you're already voting for our federal runaway spending, like, what good does a report do for you if you're still going to vote for that spending? As far as Medicare goes, we need to filter out some of the waste. There's a lot of waste in Medicare and improper payments, which is another bill that my opponent proposed. And so we need to filter out the waste and the improper payments and get it to be a more well-oiled machine. And I know that there's going to be experts in the field, doctors and administration in the healthcare industry that we're going to have to get a hold of and devise a data-driven plan to help Medicare run more efficiently, because the government is not very good at running efficiently.
Mr. Moore, 30 seconds.
Thanks. I just want to clear up. I think my challenger is talking about the fiscal state of the nation, which is my bill, which we did pass out of committee, and that is a reporting requirement that will take place. That's not the Fiscal Commission Act. So these are two very, very different bills. Just wanted to make sure that I clarify that for the record. Fiscal Commission is a commission act that will get us to be able to deal with our major debt drivers. Our major debt drivers, again, our three biggest budget line items are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Defense is now becoming lower on the list. We're spending less on defense than we ever have as a nation, and the interest that we're paying on our debt from the decades before that. So again, very important to be clear, fiscal state of the nation is my bill, very supportive of it. It has strong support, but the Fiscal Commission Act is the bill that I'm talking about as the catalyst.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Miller, 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, that was an error on my part. And he talks about, our discretionary spending being 23% of the budget, and guess what? that is only going to decrease because of all of the interest that we're paying on our debt. So right now we're $1 trillion in interest, in annual interest. And by 2028, that's projected to be $1.4 trillion. So the longer that we go on and don't reduce our spending substantially, then our discretionary spending will just keep looking smaller and smaller. It'll go to 22, 21, 20%. It'll keep shrinking. And so it's still vitally important. It doesn't matter what kind of spending we're talking about. It's all important.
Mr. Moore, 30 seconds.
Somewhere here, because he is absolutely right. It's 23% of our spending. You can't solve the major debt drivers with only dealing with 23% of our spending. That's all we vote on in Congress. So I established, and with the Americans for Prosperity group came to me and said, hey, we love your voice on this. We want you to be the lead on this particular bill. It's called the Comprehensive Congressional Budget Act. Would force us to vote on the entirety of everything. I'm not scared to take a Medicare and Social Security or those type of votes. But if we only deal with 23%, we'll never get out ahead of our debt issues. And with that 23%, Republicans in the majority found a way to trim out $2.1 trillion over this budget cycle. It was a significant win, and we've got to go tackle the major problems in our budget.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you have 30 more seconds if you'd like.
Yeah, I think I'm okay.
Like I said, we're getting somewhere. We're seeing the entirety of the budget, and we've got to be able to go after all of it, not just the small portion.
We have about 5 minutes left in the debate before we get to closing arguments, so we'd like to get through a couple more topics. Next on the list is abortion, the Dobbs case. In that case, the U.S. Supreme Court returned the regulation of abortion to the states. We have seen also recent debate that there should be federal legislation on this issue. Would you support legislation that allowed abortion up to 15 weeks? Why or why not? Mr. Miller, you go first.
So as far as abortion goes, I will not vote for a 13 to 15 week ban on abortion, no. Abortion needs to remain in the state's power. It goes through the federalism rules. And so I would be voting against that. As far as my position, as far as abortion goes, I'm pro-life. And as far as a national abortion ban, I would actually be in favor of a national abortion ban. I know that's not what you're asking. But if we look back and say we're just after the Civil War, was the Emancipation Proclamation good legislation? Well, yes, it was. Why? Because all men are created equal. Well, aren't all babies created equal? If life begins at conception, isn't that a baby? So that is my reasoning behind it, but I don't think that this will come up in the next legislative session.
Because you forewent a few seconds earlier, let me just get a bit of clarification so that we're clear on this. Would you vote in support of a federal abortion ban, or would you not?
Yes.
You would. Thank you. Mr. Moore, you have a minute.
Thanks for clarifying, because I was confused at that too, because he said he wouldn't, and then he said that he would. Look, House Republicans are not going to bring this 15-week abortion limitation, ban, whatever you want to call it, up. President Trump has indicated that he would not support this. What I am fully supportive of right now is for every state to look at what Utah is doing, where we support women that are going through and families that are going through difficult decisions. I've never had to face this. I could never understand fully what we would be going through. But Utah is making it very clear that we support life, and we want to make sure that there is a deterrence from what existed during Roe. And that's what's so beautiful about Dobbs. I get a little emotional about this because when they were making the arguments for Dobbs, I was flying home and listening to the arguments while I was going to go see my baby who had just been born. I missed his birth when I was back in Washington, D.C. And we need to make sure we do everything we can to protect the sanctity of life. Utah is going to put forth, and they're going to have a track record of showing how we support individuals going through tough things, but we're going to be very firm on what our support is. And then every state needs to look at us and say, hey, Utah's doing it right, just like we do on everything else, whether it be the economy, how we deal with volunteerism, across the board. Utah does it right, and this is something that we need to make sure that other people in other states see how we're going to approach this issue.
Yes, Mr.
Can you ask him
Miller,
if he would be in support of a national abortion ban?
Is that your rebuttal, your request?
Yeah.
I'm happy to ask that question. Do you support a federal ban on abortion?
There is no legislation that will come up to support a federal abortion ban.
If it came up, would
right
you
now.
support it?
If it is something that will protect the sanctity of life, I have an A+ voting record with Susan B. Anthony. It's one of the best organizations that's involved in this space because they're about supporting individuals, they're crisis centers and all that type of stuff. If this is something that's going to promote life and be able to make it, I would absolutely support that. We'll see how President Trump is going to be able to deal with this and handle this. We need to first, what is the reality of what's going on, is to look at the states that are doing it, and they're doing it well, like Utah is going to, and be able to share that and mimic that, and not make this so combative. We need to make this about the women and the children that this ultimately affects.
That's a non-answer.
We're 2 minutes.
I answered fully. I gave it a full answer.
Would you like to say something,
Gave it
Mr.
more
Miller?
context.
No, I'm good.
Thanks.
This will likely be our last question before closing statements. One of the longstanding arguments between Utah and federal government is the management of federal lands. How do you propose to negotiate and improve those federal and state relationships in the future? And this question, I believe, goes to Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore first. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, bit of a boring concept. It's not going to catch a lot of headlines, but shared stewardship agreements that exist with our state and any of the federal agencies that are involved in our lands. These need to be rock solid, rock tight. We need to show other states how to actually engage in them, and we do these things responsibly. Governor Cox's team, before that Governor Herbert's team, they were always so good about showing the federal government how to best take care of our land. We should be having more control over what goes on in our state. There's no question about that, and every single member of the Utah delegation agrees wholeheartedly with that. We need to address PILT, the eastern states representatives. They have no idea what goes on out here in the West. There's fewer of us, so it's a little bit more difficult, but show them how we do it best, and we'll continue to have good outcomes like we do here.
Thank you. 45 seconds, Mr. Miller.
So our public lands should be coming back towards our state. Our state should have more control over our land, and to be honest, I'd love to see a repeal of the Antiquities Act, where Biden and Obama are taking huge swaths of land in southern Utah and creating monuments out of them. And so this is highly detrimental to our mining and our industry in the area, and it stunts economic growth. And not only that, it affects the hunters, and it affects those that are trying to enjoy the outdoors in southern Utah. And so, yeah, there's a lot of problems with the government and our public lands.
Thank you. We have now reached the end of the debate. And by random drawing held earlier, it was determined that the first closing statement would go to candidate Moore. So, Mr. Moore, Blake Moore, your closing statement. You'll have 1 minute.
Again, thank you, Julie, for a great debate and a great discussion with Mr. Miller. I keep it very simple here, and we already talked about it a little bit. I've worked my tail off. We're getting a constituent service award. Candidly, that's one of the most important things we do, helping my constituents navigate a federal agency that they have to. It's very difficult in a lot of ways. You get stuck in the loop, and we're there to be able to support you and help you navigate getting a passport, dealing with an IRS issue, Social Security, you name it. But next year is an opportunity for Republicans like we haven't had in a long time. We took back the House this last time. I'm thrilled to be a part of going and helping my candidates and other candidates across the country to make sure that we have the numbers to be able to do that. With that, we have kept President Biden's spending to nil. It has been completely obliterated from his ability to do all of the $5 trillion that he did. Next year, we have a chance to redo a lot of what was so successful in 2017. Through the House Ways and Means Committee and through making sure that we have these tax provisions, they're all expiring basically next year. We need to make sure that we reenact them so we have the strongest economy continual in the next 20 to 30 years as our nation. And this is the year that we're going to have a chance to do that. Send me back there. That's why I asked for your vote, so I can continue the work I've been doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Mr. Paul Miller, your closing statement.
Yeah, I am not a politician. I am here to represent the middle class, and that's what I fully intend to do. If I get elected, I won't be the guy at town halls telling you what I've done. I'll be the guy at town halls asking you, what should I do? What policies would you like to see changed? And, you know, I want to represent my friends, my neighbors, and my family, and those in the 1st District. And, you know, Congressman Moore asked for the majority when he ran 2 years ago, and he said that they wanted the majority. And now that they have the majority, they haven't pushed their leverage with the House, and they have compromised way too much. And I feel like that's what we need to cut out of our representation in Washington, D.C. and we need change, and we need it now, especially when it comes to our debt. But I appreciate your support, and I appreciate your vote on June 25th.
Thank you to our candidates Paul Miller and Blake Moore for participating today and for your dedication to public service, both of you. Election Day is Tuesday, June 25th. Contact your county clerk if you have any questions about making your vote count in this election. We greatly appreciate PBS Utah for donating the production facilities to broadcast this debate. We're also grateful for the Larry H. and Gail Miller Family Foundation, Zions Bank, the George S. and Dolores Story Eccles Foundation, and the Stewart Family Foundation for their generous support of the Utah Debate Commission. This debate and others from previous years are available online at utahdebatecommission.org. I'm Julie Rose of BYU Radio. Thank you and good day.
Get rid of this cup. Burn that cup.
There.
Where am I looking? I don't ever know about this. I'm looking at you, whether you're asking the question or not.
Okay.
Gee, how are you? It's good to see you.
All right. So it seemed like that you guys, the big difference that I heard today was a lot of discussion about spending. You talked about how you reduced $2 trillion on the Biden budget, but there's still $3 trillion left.
Yeah, no, I did not.
So his point, I think, is that you're voting for these bills. You often are voting for these bills that are adding to the deficit.
When in the majority.
When in the majority.
Yeah.
So is that going to continue if you're reelected?
So if we're able to trim wasteful spending out of it, the only way to actually do it is if you're willing to support something. You can't, if you want to just kind of exist back in Washington and collect a government paycheck, you can vote no all you want, all day long, every day, for years. But if you want to lead and you want to actually direct the direction of our Article 1 responsibility, which is spending. So I'm glad the majority of our time was spent on spending, because that's what Congress should be entirely focused on. It should be our leverage point. It should be what we're focused on almost entirely. But if you want to lead and you want to drive spending in the right direction and reduce wasteful spending, then you have to be willing to support something. And that's the part that I think that the rhetoric, and I tried to make a contrast between what the reality is versus what the rhetoric is. The reality is you've got to support something to be able to drive out wasteful spending, and that's what we're doing. And in addition, the reverse the curse that we did in the House Budget Committee, that's a 10-year balanced budget plan. I wish it was sooner, but it's a 10-year balanced budget plan that will target all of the waste, fraud, and abuse that does exist in our system and get out. We've got to win elections to be able to implement this plan, and otherwise we're going to continue to be dealing with only a small pie, a small fraction of the pie on the overall spending. And the big stuff just goes on and on and on without any in autopilot.
That was going to be my follow-up. You mentioned wanting to address entitlements in some way. Are you open to reductions in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid?
So it has to be on the everything has to be on the table, and that's what the Fiscal Commission Act was designed to do, was to put everything on the table. A very Reagan, Tip O'Neill type of style to address the potential shortfall. We have 8 years before our Social Security recipients all of a sudden wake up and 24% of their what they're expecting is gone, and unless we're willing to address it. And it's not even affecting those that are in retirement right now. We missed a big opportunity pre-2008, and candidly, it was George W. Bush that was pushing it hardest, but congressional Democrats wouldn't go along with it, to be able to get these trust funds to grow more naturally and to grow, everyone wants to call it privatization it's just using a mutual fund, for crying out loud. The S&P has proven over 2 decades that it's going to grow at a strong rate. If we don't have that, we don't have the strong economy, we might as well take advantage of that. He wanted to do that. We would have prepared for 2008 better. Not the Great Recession. That's when baby boomers started to retire. So you have to be willing to talk Social Security. You can't be scared of a Democratic ad that's going to come blast you for this. And I've talked to a lot of reporters about this. I've been willing to open. That's 75% of the budget. And if we're unwilling to address that, all we're going to be dealing with is our office supply budget. We're not going to be dealing with the major pieces. And so I'm game. I'm game for anything. That's why I did the Congressional Budget Review Act, or the Comprehensive Budget Act, through Americans for Prosperity, is because it forces us to vote on the entirety of it. And if you do that, you create mechanisms for accountability. Right now, we don't vote on any of this stuff, so there's no way to reform the programs until something catastrophic happens, like it's going to happen in the early 2030s, and then it'll be like this late night deal between leadership and we figure it out. I want to get out ahead of that. And that's what I'm working on. That's why Ways and Means, that's why Budget Committee. I love it. I'll talk about this stuff all day long. I probably bore a lot of people with it, but I appreciate you focusing on some of the most important realities that we have.
Well, let me try pinning you down a little bit more on it. I mean, you'd say it has to be on the table, but that means if you're going to make it solvent, that requires reductions in some benefits.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. So you'll have to adjust the age. You'll have to look at the benefits that you're giving out. You have to look at revenue. You have to look at caps, right? You have to look at the entirety of it to determine what's healthy for our economy and what's capable. Look, we have a demographic problem in our country right now. We're losing the ratio that we had when we established Medicare and Social Security, and they are what? The worker to beneficiary ratio. And the beneficiary ratio is growing because we're having an aging population and we don't have enough in the workforce. So if you look at my debt and deficit task force, I created this right as I first got into Congress. It's a group of economists and lawyers and business owners, primarily from the Ogden area. One of the first paragraphs that we have in that thing is to talk about participation rate. And if we can grow the participation rate by even a small percentage, we bolster what's going into the economy to be able to help that potential shortfall. But my kids cannot expect the same program that exists now. And we just did Secure 2.0. I won't belabor it. Secure 2.0 should add about 5 extra years of someone's savings for their own retirement. We need to be doing it more personally. And we did that by the Secure 2.0. If you're paying your student debt down, you get to actually you can have your company contribute on your 401k of your behalf. You don't have to do the match. You pay your your debt down, your company can contribute. That's gonna help 5 years, over 5 years, over someone's career. That's a significant higher amount in their 401k. There's a lot of talk about, even moving that up the chain a little bit so we can, the child tax credit's great, but we should be shoring up people with 529 plans and all those opportunities. So there's a lot of really good private sector opportunities that didn't exist when Social Security was created in 1935, that now exist, that we can be more thoughtful and smart about how we go about doing it. But not if we don't get to vote on it. Not if we just every year only vote on the appropriations process and, anyway, I belabored that a little bit, but that's what I'm back there to do, and that's what you have to do through the Ways and Means Committee.
I'll ask the next question. Thanks for getting into the briefs today. How do you think it went? When you think about your performance?
I love it. I enjoy it. I'm always want to be here to be able to clear up any and he was willing to admit that he miscommunicated several things. And so I'm here to make sure that my constituents know the reality over the rhetoric. And I love to be able to do that. I felt like I was in a lot of control today, felt like I had a great performance. We're doing really well in this election cycle. Excited for June 25th, excited to go help some other of my colleagues after that as we lead up to November to be able to maintain the majority. That's going to be first and a big, strong priority of mine once we get through this primary season, is to make sure that we have that. We have big things that we can accomplish in the 119th Congress. So I felt like today went great. I enjoy being here. I appreciate the debate commission. They run a very good, these are great questions. It's respectful. There's a good tone, and we can actually debate the issues, and it's not about a lot of the nonsense you see in politics these days.
Absolutely. One last question. We went through so many different topics. If you get elected, what are your top 3 priorities? And if you could just be very specific about what you want to chase down.
It will come as no surprise that I've talked a lot about 2025. If we have the White House, House, and Senate, we have an opportunity to do what we didn't do back in 2017. All we did was tax reform. So first priority, I know we can get this done, is to reenact and reengage, re-up, make permanent what we can, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. There's a lot of provisions in there that are strong for our economy. We need that. We need a strong economy more than anything. That's what's going to be our most important piece about debt. Getting after the major debt drivers too, using the budget reconciliation process for some of this entitlement piece, and actually making these programs exist and have a strong future. And then continue to be a strong supporter of defense. We have a lot going on in the world, and Hill Air Force Base is at the heart of all of it. Whether it be in Europe, the Middle East, or over in the South Pacific, we have our men and women from Hill Air Force Base. We just got an award. The 388th just got an award as a fighter squadron. This is big news. It's really exciting to see. And I love supporting those individuals. They're doing the job that's creating a safer world for all of us. And there's a lot of things going on in the theater out there. And Hill Air Force Base is at the heart of all of it. And so I want to make sure that I'll always continue to support that. Those 3 things.
Thank you.
On Ukraine, you said during the debate that you think a Trump administration would be able to bring an end to the Ukraine war. I wonder if you could get into that specifically, what they could do to resolve that conflict, and is there anything you think the Biden administration should be doing right now that they're not? So
I always have been very clear the Biden administration should have done more early on, things related to different types of sanctions, pipeline, things like that. Biden administration continues to do just completely nonsensical things with the looming ban on LNG exports. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. Why would we make a European ally have to choose between U.S. LNG or potentially Russian LNG or natural gas? I mean, it's beyond me. I can't understand it. And I don't think any Democrat can actually, they don't get pinned down on this, but they can't defend it either. I'm hopeful that if we were to see a Trump administration, we could end this conflict. I look back and I'm basing a lot of this just on historical understanding, right? Like, there was advancement during Obama. It did not happen during Trump. There was advancement almost immediately during Biden. Like, what's the magic sauce here? What can we do to create an end to this conflict? I don't know what those negotiations are. It's not my place to say, but there's a lot. Is it NATO? Is it not NATO? Is it where's the line in Donbass? What do we do about Crimea? There's a lot of talk here. We need to make sure that Ukraine has a stronger future. I think that President Trump would be a much better commander-in-chief on this particular issue than President Biden.
You mentioned the abortion issue. You think Utah's doing it right? It should be a model for other states. What is it you think that Utah's doing right?
Look, we're being open. We're trying to make sure we have pregnancy centers that are available for tough situations, providing the information. across the board. I support what the Utah law is, and let's give it a shot. Let's look at a post-Roe world and say, okay, what can we do to create people to say, you know what, I need to be more responsible. Like if we accomplished that through Dobbs, and people had a mindset change, just that, and we were able to limit the number of abortions that were taking place, whether it's in a state that allows it or a state that necessarily doesn't or has certain limitations, if you will, or exceptions, like what can we be doing to do that? And if we can create that people to pause for a moment and say, I need to be more responsible, I think it's a win.
Where do you stand on access to contraception, just really quick? Do you support that as a right?
Yeah, I don't think that's even controversial, so. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Are we recording? Okay. Anytime.
Hi there. I had asked Representative Moore about this, but how do you think your performance went? There were some, instances where he was fact-checking you. I'd love to hear what you were thinking.
Yeah, I referenced the wrong bill. But yeah, I think I did really well, and I think I addressed like his voting record, especially as far as spending goes. And, and that's a big part of my message and what we need to change in Washington, D.C. But yeah, I think it went pretty well.
Do you expect your messaging to resonate with the first district vote as well?
Oh, I hope so. And I hope to find out, positively on June 25th.
There seems to be some disagreement over, at least to my guess, of the government shutdown. If you are elected, would you be supportive of shutting down government rather than passing a budget like Congressman is obligated to do as a member of the majority?
Yeah, government funding is one of the responsibilities laid out in the Constitution. We are supposed to fund the government. I am for funding the government, but I'm not for funding all of the waste and all of the wasteful spending that comes with that. So, and so I'm not afraid to vote no on a spending bill if there's a government shutdown tied to it, because that ultimately wasn't my decision. That was congressional leadership's decision for bringing a spending bill, not knowing that they had the votes for it at the last second. And so, we need to get that abusive process changed, and that's why I would vote no on the spending bill, so that way we can actually start to whittle away and chip away at the waste in our spending.
You just mentioned congressional leadership. Would you say that the leadership, including Republicans, sometimes push an agenda that many conservatives might not support, including the government shutdown? There was a lot of infighting during that time.
Yeah, Yeah, and you know, how I see it is, you know, there's the establishment uniparty Republicans, and there's those that are fighting for change. And you know, the establishment uniparty is kind of the monarchy in Congress right now, and the monarchy is not going to give up its power willingly. And so, and what was your question again?
Just, you know, the leadership's role, including Republican leadership's role.
Yeah, and so leadership, like, is put into leadership, you know, because the establishment and uniparty does have the control in both houses, you know, especially the Democrat house or conference, the Democrat conference. But like, yeah, so they're going to promote somebody that's someone like them, and so yeah, like even leadership will probably be in favor of something. That doesn't mean that it's that I would be in favor of it.
You talk about the uniparty, and it seems like you're running against, you know, the establishment, even in your own party, Republican leadership. Do you feel that there's a divide in the Republican conference, and do you see that as hurting your position negotiating on some of these bills if the conference itself can't even come together?
Well, yeah, and that I do feel like I'm up against the uniparty and the establishment. You know, as my opponent, like as I feel like my opponent is part of that group. You know, it's those people that are pushing bills to benefit their donors, to benefit, you know, all of the money laundering that goes on with government contracts and government funding and stuff like that. And so, you know, you see it in their campaign donations, you know, and that's what I'm against. Like, we need to quit forming policy around donors and special interests and actually look at policy that benefits Americans. And so, and which is why I decided to run.
So if you're elected, what would you do to bring some consensus or bring leadership and everyone else in your Republican conference on board if they're part of the uniparty or whatever?
Well, since, you know, the establishment and uniparty has, you know, the control right now, I'm not expecting to go into Congress being against that and being rewarded for it. You know, it's going to be hard for me, and you know, I'm not going to be rewarded as far as committee positions go or anything like that. And that's why I hope that America as a whole wakes up to what DC is like, and America needs to be voting these incumbents out that are causing the problems. And you know, because our nation is worth fighting for. And you know, which again is also why I'm running. You know, this is what we need to change.
What are the 3 specific policy issues that you would focus on if elected?
So the 3 biggest issues that I see right now are the southern border with immigration, our debt is unsustainable, and what I like to call woke policies, or the left's agenda. And so, you know, as far as climate change and stuff like that, which I'm very against. And so, did that answer your question? Okay.
Congressman Warren was talking about needing to look at entitlements if you're going to balance the budget, because it is such a large part of the debt and deficit right now. Would you be supportive of reductions in Medicare and Social Security if you're elected, and if so, how does that jive with your priority of helping the middle class?
Yeah. So, and that's the thing, like, and unfortunately, if you look at the debt statistics, you know, like we're 35 trillion in debt, 1 trillion in annual interest, and a debt to GDP ratio of 124%. You know, you fast forward that to 2028, we're with the same trend of spending, you know, we're at 46 trillion in debt, 1.4 trillion in interest, and, you know, a debt to GDP ratio that's, you know, it's getting closer to 140%. So this is very concerning, and it's very concerning, you know, considering our economy and the U.S. dollar. And so, like, nothing is off the table as far as looking at what we need to change. For Social Security, there was a policy that was proposed that we, you know, reduce the benefit or the inflation of the benefit by 7%, and that would make Social Security more sustainable. And then that way it doesn't, you know, that way Social Security doesn't become insolvent in 2034, and then that way there still is a benefit later on. And as far as Medicare goes, there is waste in Medicare, and I don't know the full details of that. That's going to be, talking with a lot of leaders and experts in that field. And so, but yeah, there's waste everywhere in government, honestly.
Talking about Ukraine, it seems like you and the congressman kind of differed on the approach to spending there. I just wonder, do you think it's in the U.S.'s national interest to see a free Ukraine, to see Putin defeated?
Oh, I would love to see Putin defeated. And is it in America's best interest? Yeah, it probably is. But should we, be funding the war for it? No. We shouldn't be borrowing money from China to fund some other country's war. Like, we have our own problems here at home. As like I said with the debt figures, we don't have time to keep throwing out money and trying to solve the world's problems by throwing money at it. And so, and that's, what we need to get out of in Washington, D.C.
Would you say that's just lower on your priorities then? Because it seems like if it's something that is in our best interest, it would be something worth spending a little bit of money. Is it just the amount of money is too high for you, or you don't think we should be spending at all on Ukrainian defense?
So I think that we need to push Ukraine to get a peace deal with Russia, which is, Trump's policy. Let's stop the killing, let's stop the conflict. And I've heard that Ukraine has had several opportunities for a peace deal, but the U.S. and the U.K. have prevented them from fulfilling those peace deals. And so why are we stopping that? And what is the end game of Ukraine? And that's one thing that politicians in D.C. can't answer. They don't know what the end game is. But Ukraine's not particularly winning this war. And so we can't go and fund another 20-year war like we did with Afghanistan, And so that's the concern. Like, we don't have the longevity financially to keep throwing money at this.
All right.
Last question. Thank you.
No, I think we're good.
Like we're done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.